Hello and welcome to Gordon Barrow Burgundy Unpicked podcast. It's a gorgeous spring morning here at Gordon Barrow headquarters, and I'm joined with the usual sort of quartet, I guess, at the moment. I've got Mr. Eccles. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Got Guy.
Hello, hi Joe.
And Nev.
Hello.
Wonderful. So we are coming with you today with a podcast on one of our favourite Côte de Beaune producers, Marquis D'Angerville, Domaine Marquis D'Angerville. We currently are out with the offer at the moment, as you probably have seen either through our websites, emails, or even social media, as we've done a few events over the last week as well. We had Guillaume D'Angerville in town with his daughter Margot, which we'll probably touch on because it's very relevant, the sort of new generation coming through, which is exciting. But I thought we maybe start with, I guess, what do we like about Marquis D'Angerville? And I think in order for me to sort of get the ball rolling, so to speak, it would be to talk about Volnay itself. And we had what bolstered my love and understanding even further, and Nev was part of this actually. We did a little group visit in October last year, and Guillaume put on a brilliant tour of Volnay himself. So we jumped in the back of his BMW estate car and down to the bottom of the, well, not the bottom actually, the heart of the village. There's a single track road that sort of runs from northeast southwest straight through Volnay below the village if you've been there. And we got out and hopped out at Champon, if you remember, and we sort of jumped out and looked up at Champon. And from there, and I've never done this, and it was very, very cool actually, because it gave me a total and complete understanding of the sort of the different aspects of the individual clima, the positioning of the vineyards, and then also you can see the difference in colours, that the array, the pattern of soil types that go through. But anyway, as you look sort of just directly, so you're located directly south underneath the village, and as you look at sort of Champon, quite big holding for them, glorious vineyard for Marquis D'Angerville, and the wine itself is one that's probably been on the biggest trajectory of growing success and quality for them. And then you can see there's almost a sort of a mineral sort of rich style, which Kyler has with the stoniness, then comes down into a lot more sort of browner soils, and it has this sort of ferrous oxide character, which Guillaume talked about.
Yeah, I remember Guillaume being particularly animated at the bottom of Champon. You get the sense that Champon really is, as much as kind of Clos de Duc is the sort of the big guy in the range, but Champon he seems to have a lot of affection for. And as Joe was saying, like really, really cool, because you can actually see the whole village really, and you can see sort of like Volnay sort of before you, which is pretty great. And you say Champon's got this sort of reddish kind of iron oxide clay soils, and then literally just a hop over the wall really into Cairet from Champon, you immediately move to this really limestone rich soil. I mean, there's not many vineyards that you can see sort of with complete clarity. That difference in soil, and so having Guillaume sort of walking us through it all was
very cool, yeah.
Really great.
And the thing that probably jumped out the most to me, because as you're standing, you're right, you look a little bit more southwest, and it goes into Cairet, just north of Champagne, goes up into Taipei. And as you look across the village, and this is what really hit me, was popping above the entirety of the village is Clos de Duc. So the elevation, which you don't really consider, because Guy, I've been there to Clos de Duc many times with you, because obviously it's just outside the domain. We finished tasting in the cellars. You step outside, you have a walk around the corner, and there is Clos de Duc.
This is back garden.
This is back garden, yeah. And you feel a bit of awe because you're in such a beautifully prized piece of land. But I didn't realise how high up it was when you're there, and then looking down from Champagne, seeing it over, it's on the north side of the valley, facing that sort of southeast. So great exposure. And then if you go onto the south side of the valley, almost directly opposite is where you've got Taipei. So the reason I'm sort of bringing this out, because it really hit home how these Volnays that Guillaume produces, they've got such different personalities, and it's a brilliant exploration. And if you like Volnay's style, where we can talk about that in a moment in terms of what makes a sort of a quintessential Volnay. But you've got then Fremier on the far east of the appellation, northeast, bordering Pommard, which is just all about limestone as well. With Kaileray, we've got tension. You've then got that sort of clay character coming in with Champon and a little bit of Type, so darker fruit. Clos de Duc is the most mineral, sort of driven style, but structured. So if you love Volnay, and I know a lot of people who do, and quite often I'd probably say it's something that people find once they get into Burgundy, because you don't necessarily start there. A lot of people start in the Côte de Nuit and you gravitate down. It is one you have to jump in, because these expressions are just glorious, aren't they? But I mean, so that's the sort of the place. I mean, do you want to sort of talk about maybe the history, because the domain is wonderfully historic.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Thanks. So I'll do a quick whiz through the history of the estates, because it's one of the oldest estates in Burgundy, and it's been in continuous ownership for over 2 centuries by the same family. So to go back to the very beginning, the first recorded mention of the estate was in 1507. So that gives you a little idea of the longevity here. And then the next era really started when Baron du Mesnil acquired in 1804 Clos de Duc, which, as we've said, is the iconic monopole belonging to today's Domaine. Also Typier, Caillaret, and Champon. So those 4 vineyards were all acquired at the same time, and really still form the crux, the core of the estate to this day.
Nice little hall, isn't it?
Not bad. And all 4 of those could be traced back to the 12th century holdings of the Dukes of Burgundy. So if you go to Burgundy, your first port of call, if you go on the train, will be Dijon. And as we tend to do, we spend a Sunday night in Dijon, and there are very few restaurants open in Dijon on a Sunday. And so we tend to go to the same place, and it's right opposite the original ducal palace of the Dukes of Burgundy. And it's the most amazing historic sort of setting with which to begin a week of tastings in Burgundy. But anyway, that's an aside. The next era of the domaine really started in the second half of the 19th century. The Baron de Menil's son, Eugène de Menil, took over, and then he died in 1888 and did not have any direct heirs, so it passed to his nephew, who was also his godson, Sem, who was Marquis D'Angerville. So he was only 15 years old at that time. So obviously a real youngster in terms of taking over one of the great vineyard holdings of the Côte de Beaune. There was then a little interlude of about 20 years when the phylloxera crisis struck. And this really decimated the holdings across Burgundy, not just the D'Angerville holdings, but region-wide. It was a savage blight on the landscape. And so it was really after phylloxera that the next and sort of modern, if you like, era of the domaine started. And in 1906, the domaine's name was changed to Domaine Marquis D'Angerville. And Sem, who was by that stage, I guess he would have been about 35, he took over, and it was really Sem d'Angerville that started bottling the wines at the estate, started exporting the wines principally to the United States to begin with, but elsewhere as well, including the UK. And he was a founding member of many different bits and pieces in Burgundy, including the INAO predecessor, which is the Institute of the Appellations of Origin. So really this body that looks at the individual classification of land in Burgundy. He then died in 1952, and his son Jacques took over the estate. And Jacques was Guillaume d'Angerville's father. So Jacques died in 2003, and Guillaume, who was working as a banker in Paris at the time, unexpectedly had to come back to the domaine and took up the reins in 2003. And that was really when our story and our acquaintance with the estate goes back to.
I remember Guillaume's so nice to talk to, and sort of very. He's not sort of outward and sort of flash in any sort of way. But I remember him saying that for the first couple of years after he took over from his father, he didn't want to see any journalists, just because he was so worried about how his wines would be received.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's as a relatively young and new face to an estate. I mean, it must be a real leap of faith, and also taking over in a vintage like '03, which was such a sort of quirky heat-affected vintage. I mean, the 03 D'Angervilles are wonderful wines, but to take over in that sort of high-pressure environment where really the beginning of the climate change era was starting, I mean, it must have been a very difficult time to take
weight
over.
of history as well.
No, indeed, yeah. I mean, Guillaume he's spoken to Nev and I before, particularly when we had a wonderful lunch, which we could maybe give a bit more colour on later on at the Domaine, about he had to really lean into the team at the time. And, Jacques obviously passed away, and as you said, it wasn't on the cards in any way. That had done, 5 decades of vintages, so it put in a really good shift at the Domaine. And Guillaume, luckily, not luckily, it's just because Jacques obviously put in such a wonderful structural leadership with regisseur, etc. And there was a team that he could lean into to make sure they could help guide him through that journey of becoming, the Domaine owner and the man who's making the decisions at the Domaine. On the historic, when you were just chatting then about the history, and Nev, you sort of just nudged it in my mind, was, this is a Domaine rooted with Sem coming in, which is Guillaume's grandfather, and clearly a serious man of integrity. And I think this Domaine is built on honest focus of just making as high quality expressions of Volnay as possible. And Guillaume told us a little bit of a story, which was, you've probably heard. I mean, I think we have mentioned this on the podcast before, so I'll keep it very small, but very short. There are movements to try and raise a couple of Premier Crus de Grand Cru, one particularly in Nuit Saint-Georges with Les Saint-Georges, in Pommard with Rouge and Haut Rougien, and then in Volnay with Clos de Duc. So, because the reason being that there wasn't anything particularly in these two was that when the appellations were sort of drawn up, Henri Gouge was asked to represent the Côte de Nuit, Sem d'Angeville was asked to represent the Côte de Beaune, and together they were asked to help classify the Premier Crus, Grand Crus, and keep that sort of, and it leads back into the INAO, which you were sort of talking about. And as men of honour and integrity, they decided that they would not have any bias and therefore not put a vineyard forward for Grand Cru from their own villages because they didn't want to be seen to be sort of influencing it. I think Guillaume probably secretly harbours he wished he'd maybe been a little bit more selfish, but all the same, I think it just reflects, these are the type of people that have been there.
Yeah, and it's worth bearing in mind on that point that there are no red Grand Crus in the Côte de Beaune, and I think it's a point of contention, and it's probably a point of some regret, I guess, in many quarters, and that, these are vineyards which are worthy of Grand Cru status. And the fact that there aren't any Grand Crus for those historic reasons that you've just touched upon, Joe, I think is...
Corton.
Sorry, apart from Corton. Yeah, you're right. The hill of Corton, obviously, to the north of Beaune. We almost think of that as a different terroir altogether. But yeah, you're right. It is the Côte de Beaune. The one other thing, sorry, before we hand over, that I was going to say is that on that historical aspect, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to attend a dinner where we looked at Champon over a vast time span. And one of the wines of the night was Champon 1953. Which would have been Jacques d'Angeville's first complete vintage when he first took over.
Amazing.
So it really sort of sets the historical tone for these wines, which are very long aging. I think there's a tendency to want to drink this ethereal style of Pinot Noir in its youth, but actually it ages wonderfully well.
Yeah, I mean sounds pretty special. That retrospective. I thought what actually might be quite a cool thing. I want to ask you all actually is, Volnay on the one hand for me is sort of one of those places that's full of typicity, but sort of also full of diversity in terms of the vineyards. I do sort of have in my mind a sort of typical style of Volnay that's sort of red fruited and sort of, ethereal. But as we've kind of said, as we touched on, just in Guillaume's holdings, there's a massive amount of diversity of kind of terroir, and you can get a full spectrum of wines from the village. What's your view on kind of what makes a great Volnay, and why is D'Angeville?
Yeah, there was something I was going to say before, and this links in quite well to it actually, and goes back to sort of the Grand Crus not being made. What makes D'Angeville is the high quality, and the first reason for that is when the Grand Crus were brought in 1937, 1938. no Grand Crus in Volnay, that's okay. But then 3 years after that, the Premier Crus are introduced during the occupation, and those Premier Crus were chosen by people not from Burgundy, who were picking the highest quality vineyards, and it tells you about how high the quality of Marquis d'Angerville is, that all the vineyards of the estate, barring 0.49 hectares, were designated Premier Cru. So you can see there that already this is a historic estate that has high quality.
Mm-hmm.
Back to your first question before the history geekiness.
We're like a little tangent, don't worry.
Yeah, it's all good. Wait till I tell you about Quarton and the history there. For a different pod. Volnay for me should be highly perfumed, a mixture of red, strawberry, and sort of real cherry fruit that also has some real black fruit in it as well. It should be almost like the Shamble of the South to me, a bit iron fist, velvet glove, velvety tannins, but you get the sort of power of the soils of that chalky terroir coming through in many cases, and yeah, I wrote in my offer, which Will Hargrove sort of slagged off, saying that it wasn't a word that he would ever use. Incisive acids. What do I mean by that? I mean that the wines should be perfumed, floral, rich in ripe red fruit and black fruit, and then this cleansing acidity comes through. Now, what makes Marquis d'Angerville wines that step up and that much better is the fact that they have a higher tannin concentration, because they are all the vineyards are planted with pretty prized Pinot d'Angerville clone, smaller berries, sort of more tannins, more skin to juice ratio, and that means that you get more power, you get more cut and thrust. Basically, there is a lot of energy to the wines. There's a lot of beefiness. You really get this full spectrum of red and black fruit. You get these haunting perfumes that come out of the glass. They soar out of the glass. But then that real drive, incisive acids, as I've said, and the ability to age for decades easily, as Guido's already said, 1953 Clos Duc.
I think it's a nice summary. Not much more to add to that, really, in terms of certainly what I sort of view as my prime example of Volnay traits within a wine, aromatically and on the palate. With coming into d'Angerville itself, it's then you've got the obviously the elements of the climat we're talking about, and that's where they play in. And this is the beauty of Burgundy, and then you lob in the grenade of vintage as well, and then it explodes into a different sort of area as well. But within their own holdings, I think, if you start sort of the north of the village and work its way down, you've got Clos Duc obviously at the very, very top, and we've spoken about the elevation, and so because of that, and it tends to be the most freshest and structured style because it's got a slightly cooler feel because of where it's situated higher up, but also at the top and entrance of the valley, that Volnay Valley where that wind comes down, and it's been brutal because during the 10s, if you recall, there were 3 vintages where there was hail. Brutal hail. And remember when we were with Alison and we went and visited Guillaume d'Angerville, and he was just saying, this was 2016, I think, and he just said, the insurance have written to us and said they're no longer going to insure us for hail cover, which was nuts because I had 3 vintages where obviously they've just decimated, and it's really, really, really tough. But since then, I don't know what's happened, but the powers to be have been shining on them. They haven't really had that issue since, which is great. But it's more just to demonstrate that where Clos Duc is situated, you've got more elements exposed to it as well, which I think in a very positive way, which allows that sort of structure and mineral transparency to come through. You've got Fremier, which is all about the limestone, so that tension style coming down. You've got Piture and Mitan, which are sort of blended together in the Premier Cru, which is very unique because most people would do that separately. And I'll remind me to come on to a side note. Margot told me something about that wine over dinner last week, and I'll mention it. Champon I love the roundness and the sort of the slight more opulent feel that comes within Champon. And I think it's that, the large chunk they've got towards the bottom of the slope, which is still the middle of the Premier Cru stretch, but the bottom of Champon, where you've got that ferrous oxide, and I think you get that sort of rounded, more detailed depth of darker fruits coming through. Type A being opposite, for me in my head, there's just this incredible finesse that comes through, but on the darker side of Volnay, where you've got, it's almost yin and yang's the wrong expression. It's just I guess it's the spectrum of Volnay, where you've got Fremier's sort of dancing and energetic and tense, and then Type A's got this darker sort of but quite seductive side, but with power, and it ages phenomenally, Type A. And then obviously Kyler again, which you mentioned before, is very much focused on more traditional chalk-driven tension. And so hopefully that sort of gives an impression of Volnay itself, which was eloquently put by you for once, Mr. Eccles. And then I'll throw in the different clima. So don't want to talk about the vintage, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just to echo what you said, I mean, I think Type A for me is the darkest in profile, and it's the one that's probably the most intellectual of the lineup. You have to work, as Guillaume says, quite hard to understand it sometimes. It repays kind of revisiting and sort of taking your time, and it unwinds slowly in the glass. Whereas perhaps the likes of Champon and Fremier are sort of just impossible not to love. Whereas Type A, you just have to, you try a bit harder.
I find Type A the equivalent that sort of jumps out to me in my head is La Trissier Chambertin.
Yeah.
Is this sort of darker, more mineral driven, can be quite tricky to understand in its youth. Big structure, long lived, and then you sort of have the sort of unifying presence of Duke on the other hand, which sort of seems to sort of can take the sort of generosity and richness that you find in Champon, but also sort of bring great mineral expression that you find in Type A, and this sort of elevated sense of structure and sort of grandeur as well. I mean, I think that for me is always, completely different wines, completely different part of the region, but I've always found there's a sort of link between Type A and La Trissier that's felt quite natural for me. I like that.
One thing I tried to bring out in this year's offer, if you've seen the brochure, and if not, let us know, and we're happy to post a copy to you, is the biodynamic approach at Marquis d'Angerville. And I think this is something that underpins their approach, in the sense that they are very detail driven. There's a great respect for the vineyards as a sort of homogeneous whole, and they try to they successfully prioritize this beautiful purity of fruit, and I think that goes hand in hand with biodynamics. For me, the real character of Great Volnay is the sort of sense of volume without weight. And it's a little bit similar to what we were saying before, that is achievable in the best Chambord Musigny's as well. You have this aroma, but you have no sensation of heaviness in the mouth at all. There is then this wonderful underlying mineral tension to them, but the real ethereal quality of great Volnays and great Chambords, I think is really quite special.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just to maybe just a very brief summary on the extra bits with how they approach. I mean, they're quite early picking, aren't they, as well, with it as a domain, to sort of help retain that wonderful acid backbone, incisive acids as we've had, and they within the cellars they opt for a pumping over versus a punching. The extraction is controlled, but not too deep, but also not too light. And I think that's probably quite important for Volnay. But it's because of those clones. I think you're getting good phenolics from there, and it's 20% max oak, and it's so again, it's more focused on expression of origin, isn't it? And that's lovely. So on that, I mean, the 23s. What's we've all sort of had a little dabble and tasted them. We had a great afternoon with Guillaume, with Adam and Bryce Guy. And where would you sort of steer people to very quickly?
Okay, well, I would say don't overlook the entry-level wines, and by which I'm saying on the white side of things, they make a great aligoté, which we've been lucky enough for the past
4 vintages now to bottle under a CMB label, and it's one of our sort of partnership CMB label.
Goes down very well with
yeah, which is lovely, and it's £175 for a 6-pack. It's a bit of a no-brainer. So I think it's quite easy to overlook the more humble appellations, but that's definitely a wine that I think people should seek out. The Village Volnay is always a bit of a favourite of mine. It's made in very small quantities, unfortunately, so it's rather hard to get your hands on. But that, I think, coming from Les Grands Champs, just below Miton, is a fabulous expression of Volnay typicity. And then, what else to mention? I mean, I think we've talked about Type A, so I won't go into that too much. Cailleret, I think, possibly for me is what I see as a real ultimate expression of this chalkiness and this kind of, to borrow Aaron's word, incisiveness of both acid but also minerality, and it's got a real fine bone texture to it, which I think is rather lovely. 23 was very successful vintage for the Domaine, I think. Do you want to talk about?
Well, I was just going to say on the whites actually, because I personally have quite a lot of love for, they do a Meursault Premier Cru Centenay, and ultimately these are grapes from Volnay. If it's Chardonnay in the Centenay vineyard, it's just classed as Meursault Centenay rather than Volnay Centenay. And the what I love about it is it kind of, the actual wine goes against what you probably imagine the wine to be like, because with Meursault you automatically take your mind to sort of slightly richer and bigger style, which may be quite floral and broad and generous, but his Centenay delivers more on energy, on precision than you really do expect, whilst bringing in this sort of Meursault trait. I had the 15 last week. The more I drink 15 whites, the more I really like them, especially like even at Grand Cru level, they're so good to go. They are not going to be the most legendary of white vintages, but they are in a beautiful phase. And then we had an awesome 16 last year with Margot and Guillaume,
Magnum,
which they only bottled in Magnum because of the sort of the frost seriousness of small yields. And it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's packed with vibrancy as well as Meursault trait.
bit of a well, I think that Meursault Centenay more broadly, but yeah, definitely the 16. It's a bit of a if you know, sort of wine, and I think I mean, actually, a customer messaged me the other day saying that they'd just opened their 04s.
Oh wow!
Meursault Centenay, and he said that they were showing absolutely brilliantly. So it's one of those. I think it's is it the thing that people necessarily would reach to out of the D'Angerville sort of portfolio sort of immediately? Perhaps not, but I think for some of our experienced Burgundy lovers amongst our customer base, it's a bit of a firm favourite. I think
I've got a great memory of Meursault 05 actually. I was in a sounds a bit. I was in a box at Goodwood races, and this is in 2019, and we were asked sort of, what could we sort of contribute to the lunch? It was an epic lunch, and I brought some Meursault 05s, and it just stunned the room because everyone sort of thought, does this age that well? And it was teenage at best, even then in 2019. So yeah, a lot of love for that. But 23s, I think we've gone over nicely. I sort of did a stupid sort of speech at dinner with Guillaume and Margot last week because I said, look, for me, it's all about the trifecta of you cannot miss out on Duke, Champon, and Type A. And it's just shooting myself in the foot because Type A is such a small sort of production, really. So, and if I was to really add one more, it'd probably be Fremier, because on the night we had Fremier 12 versus Champon 12 on that one, and Fremier 12, if anyone's got that, is in a brilliantly expressive place right now, which maybe brings us on to actually wines from the Domaine that you've had that are drinking well. 53 Champon. I mean, that must have been quite emotional for you. That would have been
incredible. It was really,
but
really
more obtainable wines.
Not often you get a birth year bottle, Guido, as well.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
He'll slap you for that
later. Actually, there was a birth year bottle in there, and it was undrinkable. So 1977.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
That was unfortunate. Yeah. My tasting note was last legs. I can't read what I've written here. Something not so good. But anyway, it's it was an amazing lineup, and it just went to show that these are wines that really, really age for the very long term. I think 09s we've had some recently, and 09 was a lovely vintage. I think at the estate. I think in these slightly warmer vintages, you especially in that first decade of the 21st century, it was still a bit uncertain the way vines and vineyards would react to warmer summers. And there's a good quote actually from Guillaume in the offer this year, and he said, thankfully the vines resisted the rather extreme conditions of July, because 23, the summer, did have some big spikes of heat. Are they naturally adapting? Probably. Is modern nature-conscious viticulture helping? Certainly. So I think it's a sort of double whammy of, yes, there is a natural adaptation going on in the vineyards, but at the same time, people's vineyard techniques and cover crops and pruning and leaf management and stuff and canopy management, it's all adapting to take account of this changing climate.
Mr. Miller and I had a dinner in the office with some customers recently that was peppered with elation and despair, with a glorious magnum of Type A 09, which was, as you say, that was just phenomenal. And no sign of the Domaine struggling in the warmer climes. But we also had a slightly devastating experience of a generous guest bringing an unfortunately corked magnum of Clos de Duc 1990, which that one hurt, because I've never had that wine, and it's you have, and that probably made it even worse.
Yeah, so I've not had it from Magnum, and it's because I think that would have probably in my head been the greatest bottle of D'Angeville I would have drunk. It's a shame. But he has promised he's got 2 more. So strike one, Mr. H. And so that sort of brings me on to, I guess, on the same thread of the legendary side. If you ever come across them, his 91s are just spectacular. 91 Type A, 91 Duke. I had an incredible experience in dinner with. The last time I had it was in a London restaurant, and it was actually, they were celebrating Beaujolais Nouveau Day, and me and some fellow wine industry peers and colleagues went in for a lunch, not focused on Beaujolais Nouveau, and decided to venture elsewhere, and ended up going with Volnay. There were so many people in the restaurant and our lunch was so extended, they asked us to spill out onto the street. So we ended up having that towards the end out on the terrace, and it was an absolutely remarkable wine, followed by an afternoon of cigars. So it teed it up quite nicely. But
fan of the people as ever. I was going to ask it first, like 2-star or 3-star?
No, bistro actually, just with a great list.
Good on you.
But I mean, in terms of the more recent vintages, the wine, I mentioned this dinner that we did last week with Margot, and I don't know if Guy want to touch on Margot in a very brief second, but the wine of the dinner was Clos de Duc 2014, and it is in incredibly elegant place now. And what I think stunned the room was where the balance of acidity, where texturally the tannins have sort of resolved and come into with 14 fruit. It was closed for quite a lot of time. There is a real openness to the fruit now, and there's just a sense of harmony there, and it just shows you that it's going to be quite immense. And we also had 205s that night. Champon 05 was the second, from Magnum was the second one. Clos de Duc 05, very, very shy at the moment. Do not open that if you've got it. It needs some further cellaring time, definitely. But yeah, well, I was sat next to Margot, and she's a lovely sort of addition to the scene at D'Angeville now.
Yeah, well, it's great to see the 6th generation in place now at the estate. So Margot is very much the representation of the new generation, and it's great to see that there is that line of continuity, and we've done our best to sort of introduce her via a number of photos in this year's offer, with Guillaume, and she's very much at home there, and will increasingly be a face of the estate. She should also be mentioned in conjunction with somebody who's been there longer, but is also a very much key member of the team, which is the regisseur François Duvivier, who's been at the Domaine since 2005, and is also a key member of Domaine du Pélican, in the Jura in Arbois, which we've started representing exclusively in the UK as well as in Asia as of 2 vintages ago. So we're very pleased to be working with both estates now in the UK, and the addition of Margot to the team will be very welcome.
I'm led to believe actually Francois is a stakeholder of
That's
Pelican
right,
as well, which is great because it just means he's not going anywhere. This continuity of this brilliance that they're in, and I think the message to get across with Marquis D'Angerville, and certainly this is in Pelican as well, just because of the quality focus. I feel that these wines are in the best place they've probably been now for a good 7 years. Champont's one of the great examples of how something so consistent is happening at the estate with high level quality being delivered more than any of the other vineyards. And I think that's because Guillaume and Francois have been certainly focusing on that as a vineyard. And I'm very excited about the future. Margot's a great addition. That's right. I was going to say she told me a little secret. Well, actually, not a secret. She asked an opinion amongst her neighbours at the dinner table with the Premier Cru. So they, it's Mitton and Piture, as we know. They're going to be replanting Mitton soon. So they sort of said, what do we do? Because obviously, if it's just going to be one vineyard, do we declassify? Do we Premier Cru? What do you think my response was?
Bottle it all in Magnum and sell it to Corny and Barrow.
Boom! Hello. Yes, I was go.
That was a guess.
Make Volnay Premier Cru Piture, because why not? You've got brilliant little holding, and it's very small, but then just do it in Magnum, and a lovely little offering for our customers.
Good idea.
So yeah, Guy, we're on the same wavelength. You see, lovely,
Great minds.
yeah, wonderful. Any final words from you, Mr. Eccles? You're sort of smirking.
Oh, just lovely watching you go along. You're in full flow. Yeah, and I think a nice thing that the first time that we went to lunch last year, we had a Fremier 17, and it was stunning. It was really just. I think that really encapsulates, what 22 years of biodynamics have done to the estate now. The fruit is so precise, so elegant and well defined that the wines will now drink a lot earlier than they used to, but it doesn't affect the aging in any way. So you can drink 17s now. I've had 17 Fremier Champagne recently, but the 16 whites are delicious. And we had a bottle in sort of Crimbo Limbo, didn't we, Nev, of 88 Clos de Duc?
We did.
Yeah, stunning.
Pretty special.
Yeah,
pretty special.
So sorry, do you want to finish?
No. I think the thing is that these wines have been good for so long. I think it's just one of those things for customers to kind of to encourage you, really, is that there are not many domains that have had such an extended period of consistency where there's just sensational wines to be had. And so whether it's obviously stocking the cellar with the new vintage that we'll be gladly releasing every year, but also do ask us about picking up some older wines, because there's a lot of joy to be had.
Yeah, I think the final point I'd like to sort of go out on is these wines are, as we hopefully sort of have expressed, for us, the best amongst Côte de Beaune reds you can get. And you don't bench these, in my opinion, against other Côte de Beaune reds. You bench these against Côte de Nuits reds, and a number of famous Premier Crus it will sweep aside from many domains, and even take some Grand Crus on and give them a real run for the money. So in my mind, when you drink these, and this is where the value aspect comes in for me, because if you took this domain and plonked it 30 kilometers north, and we were in Chambol, we'd be talking obviously probably about great quality because of the people behind it, but it'd be a very different prospect in terms of the offering, which we are now live as of this recording. So do come along and get involved. We anticipate quite strong demand for these, as there's been a loyal following, and newcomers are sort of finding them as well. So whilst you can, come and play. Right. So this could I'll sign off. Next podcast I think will probably be de Vogue, Commissaire de Vogue. I hope you have a good day. So goodbye from me, Joe.
Goodbye from me, Aaron.
Goodbye from me, Guy.
And goodbye from me, Nev.
Yeah,
That was
great.
it.
Thanks a lot for listening.